bring it down because it has to, because high blood sugar is toxic. Now, remember when you were a kid and you could eat as much junk as you wanted? You never gained any weight, never got fat? That's because when you were a kid, you still had a functioning metabolism, a resilient metabolism. That means you could flood your bloodstream with sugar, and then your body would pump out a little squirt of insulin. It would knock your blood sugar down, and then the insulin level would drop, which means your body would go right back to burning fat the way it was designed to do, so you didn't gain weight. And for the naturally lean prisoners, naturally lean adults, those people who can eat all they want and never gain weight, that is the way it still works. Now, the problem for the rest of us is that if we keep forcing our bodies to produce extra insulin, over time our muscles and organs can become resistant to our own insulin. So it's kind of like if you keep listening to headbang and rock and roll, you can start to lose your hearing, and then if I want to communicate with you, I have to shout. Well, your body's way of shouting is to start producing more insulin to keep your blood sugar under control. It has to. High blood sugar is toxic. The problem is that extra insulin is doing its job. It's keeping your blood sugar down, but at the same time, the extra insulin is also shouting at your body to store fat, because insulin is a fat-storing hormone, and it doesn't care if you're getting fatter. It only cares that your blood sugar is not going up to toxic levels. So now a couple of things are going to happen here. The more that you become insulin resistant, the higher your level of insulin goes, the harder it's going to be for you to retrieve your body fat for fuel, which means that crucial part of your metabolism isn't working anymore. So two things are going to happen. One, obviously you're going to be getting fatter because fat's going into the fat cells and it's not coming out very quickly. But the other thing that's going to happen, these guys, the muscles and organs, are going to start shouting at you to eat more. Why? Because they're starving. Because at the point in this whole cycle where you are supposed to be switching back to burning fat, you can't release the fat quickly enough to keep them fed. So you have to eat more. In other words, despite everything you've been told, you're not getting fatter because you're eating more. You're eating more because you're getting fatter. You're eating more because you have to eat more to keep these guys fed. You're eating more because the rechargeable part of the system is broken. It's taken the energy in and it's not letting it go. Now, if you understand this, do you understand why I think the fat, lazy, slob theory is ridiculous? We see fat people eating a lot. We make these moral judgments. Look at those fat people eating too much. From a biochemical standpoint, they're not eating too much. They're eating what they need to eat. They're eating what they need to keep these guys from starving because too much of their fuel has gone up here and gotten locked in. By the same token, have any of us ever looked in the mirror and said, I'm a lazy slob because I weigh too much? We're all friends, we can admit it. I certainly have. Well, what if I told you from a biochemical standpoint, you're as fat as you need to be? You are actually as fat as you need to be. I'll explain what I mean. What is the point of this system again? Keep your blood sugar level. How? By alternately storing and retrieving fat. If the fat retrieval part of the system breaks down, it's not working, your body's going to fix it. Do you know how it's going to fix it? By making your fat cells bigger. Because bigger fat cells can release more fat. You will keep on getting fatter until you are fat enough to overcome your own insulin resistance, until you are fat enough for your body to be able to once again retrieve enough fat out of those fat cells at the point in the cycle where you're supposed to be switching back to burning fat. Insulin, the bigger fat cells overcome the insulin resistance, and finally that part of the system works again. You don't like it, but your body's happy because it's keeping your blood sugar level again. Does that make sense? So, as I said before, this is not about character. This is about biochemistry. You've heard that 98% of all diets fail? That's why they fail. They fail because if you are insulin resistant, your body needs for you to be fat. If you try to shrink those fat tissues without solving this excess insulin problem first, all you're going to do is make these guys hungry, and then they're going to scream at you to eat more food, and then if you keep ignoring them, your body's going to decide to respond to that by conserving fuel, by slowing down your metabolism, which it can do. Your body can slow your metabolism dramatically. So your metabolism goes down. Now you stop losing weight, you get frustrated, you go off the diet, the weight snaps back, which is what usually happens. Why? Because if you're insulin resistant, your body needs for you to be fat. I want to give you one example of how powerful insulin is. In laboratory studies, they have taken fat mice and they've made them fatter by injecting them with insulin and then allowing them to eat as much as they wanted, because insulin ramps up their appetite. And then they kept injecting them with insulin, but they cut their food supply off completely. Those mice starved to death without burning up their body fat. The signal from insulin to keep storing fat was so powerful that they digested their muscles and organs instead. Now, because of all the bad scientists and the anti-fat hysterics, if you're overweight, you're probably going to be told to go on a low-fat, low-cholesterol, low-calorie diet, which, if you are not insulin resistant, might work. But if you are insulin resistant, and that's a high-carbohydrate diet, because most low-fat diets are, all you're doing with yourself is creating sort of a modified version of the situation that will allow a fat mouse to starve to death without burning up its own body fat. And then when this diet fails, which it probably will, the people who recommended it will blame the dieters for being fat, lazy slobs. Right. And if those mice had more discipline, they would have burned up their own fat instead of starving to death, right? Does that make any sense? Of course not. We also know that insulin resistance can eventually lead to diabetes. I mean, you all understand that, right? If you keep having to crank out more and more insulin, eventually the pancreas, the beta cells in your pancreas are going to get overworked trying to produce all that insulin. They'll start to die out. Now you cannot produce enough insulin to keep your blood sugar down, and your blood sugar will go up. Now you're diabetic. Now that used to be called adult onset diabetes, because it pretty much only happened in adults. In the last decade or so, we've now called it type 2 diabetes, because it's happening to teenagers, it's happening to 10-year-olds, it's happening in kids. These are kids who are going to be screwed up for life. In the adult population, diabetes has just gone berserk. It's roughly doubled in the last 10 years. Among our senior citizens, 25% have type 2 diabetes now. What's amazing is that the bad scientists still insist that dietary fat did all this, made us obese and turned us into diabetics. Now, look at that composition of the diet again. Can that possibly be true? Back in the 1970s, when we were getting a lot more of the share of our diet from fat, where was all the obesity and where was all the type 2 diabetes then? That makes no sense. And if you really want to see some bad logic, look at this collection of statements by the American Diabetes Association. This comes from their own guidelines. Your digestive system turns carbohydrates into sugar quickly and easily. Carbohydrate is the food that most influences blood glucose levels. The more carbs you eat, the higher your blood glucose level goes. The higher your glucose, the more insulin you need to move the sugar into your cells, and everything we've covered so far. The food pyramid is the easiest way to remember the healthiest foods to eat. At the bottom of the food pyramid are bread, cereal, rice, and pasta. These foods contain mostly carbohydrates. You need 6 to 8 servings of these foods per day. I've been saying all along that our dietary guidelines are based on bad science. I mean, I think I can rest my case there. When I finished working on my documentary, and I saw where the dietary guidelines came from, I couldn't help but wonder, what if the bad science hadn't happened? What if Ansel Keys hadn't done this, and he just kept looking at the data until he found the connection with sugar? What if, when low-fat diets failed over and over in clinical trials to reduce heart disease, the investigators had finally just admitted they were barking up the wrong tree? What if the McGovern committee decided, by gosh, senators do have time to wait for the evidence to come in? And what if Time magazine had given us this? I think if any of that had happened, that wouldn't have happened. This wouldn't have happened. This wouldn't have happened. That's why I say this was a big fat fiasco. Thank you very much.